I come before this council not as a loyal general of the Galactic Empire, nor as a conqueror who has brought the banner of this empire to the far reaches of our galaxy. Today, I stand before you as a simple messenger, a messenger carrying a warning that I urge you to heed, if not for the survival of our empire, then for your own understanding of the forces we are now dealing with. For years, I believed myself knowledgeable in the art of war, knowing every species in our galaxy that posed a challenge to our dominance. I knew how to break them, how to turn their own strengths into weaknesses, how to crush resistance before it began. So when I first received reports of a small, primitive species originating from a secluded system on the edge of the galactic map, I felt only mild curiosity. They called themselves humans, inhabitants of a single small world they named Earth. Compared to our resources and the sheer scale of our empire, they seemed inconsequential, a species bound by gravity, barely venturing beyond their own planet. I dismissed them as an oversight, an anomaly at best. But that assumption, I realize now, was my first mistake. When our initial scouts made contact, we observed their vessels, modest in build and power. They lacked the speed, the firepower, the elegance of our warships. They seemed almost rudimentary, hastily constructed compared to our sleek vessels. I recall thinking that this would be, if anything, a matter of swift extermination. But our first skirmish would be my lesson in how misguided those thoughts were. In that first encounter, we engaged a single human ship, an exploratory vessel, on the edge of one of their outer colonies. Their response was unexpected. They did not immediately flee, as other minor species might, nor did they surrender. Instead, they maneuvered in a way I hadn't anticipated. They took calculated risks, dodging our attacks with a precision that defied their supposed inexperience. Their tactics were raw, yes, but adaptive, unlike anything I had seen from a so-called primitive species. They responded with a cunning that was not taught, but felt instinctive. This was no mindless enemy. These were creatures who seemed to relish the unknown, to lean into it. I admit I was intrigued, even slightly impressed. Yet, I convinced myself it was mere luck, a fluke from a species with no understanding of what they had just provoked. So, I authorized a minor raid, a small fleet sent to demonstrate the might of our empire and crush this rebellious spark before it could spread. The humans, however, did not react as expected. They anticipated our maneuvers, outflanking us in ways that even my most seasoned strategists struggled to counter. Their tactics were unpredictable, shifting from direct confrontation to calculated ambushes. We thought we had cornered them, only to find that they had somehow set up traps, exploiting the natural terrain of space, asteroids, debris, even the energy signatures of nearby stars, as though they had been studying the art of war for centuries. It became clear that they understood us, that they were learning, evolving with each encounter. Their adaptability was unsettling, but it was their will, their raw resolve that left a lasting impression on me. For every ship we destroyed, they fought harder, each soldier seeming more determined than the last. They would use any advantage, any gap, any flaw in our ranks, not out of desperation, but out of a relentless will to survive, and perhaps something more, something defiant. I began to wonder if I was witnessing the rise of something far more potent than I had anticipated. As the battles continued, I began to feel a growing respect for these humans, for the way they clung to survival with a ferocity I had never seen. They did not seem to fear death the way other species did. They accepted it as part of their existence, even embraced it if it meant their kin would endure. One moment, in particular, stays with me. Our fleet had isolated a group of their fighters, their numbers dwindling, their fuel low. It should have been a matter of mopping up the remnants, but instead, the humans initiated a maneuver that stunned even our best tacticians. They turned their ships toward our ranks and charged. It was not a last, desperate gasp, but a calculated move. They exploited their ship's destruction as cover for an unseen flank, causing chaos among our forces, forcing us to retreat. And in that retreat, I began to feel something I had not felt in all my years of war, a hint of fear. Not for our immediate defeat, but for what this species might become, for what they might do if left unchecked. In the quiet after each skirmish, I found myself pondering not the tactics, nor the ships, nor the victories or losses, but the humans themselves, their nature, their spirit. They were more than a species fighting for survival. They were a species willing to rise, no matter the odds, no matter the cost. A species that could, with time, turn our own strategies against us, evolve beyond anything we could have foreseen. I knew then that these humans were not just another conquest waiting to happen. They were a force in their own right, one that could, and would, challenge the Empire if we continued to provoke them. They were a kindling that, if not carefully managed, could become an inferno sweeping through our ranks, consuming everything in its path. So I stand here not out of allegiance, but out of caution. I urge you to consider what we are up against. These humans, they are not to be underestimated. They are not just another species. They are a warning, a lesson, perhaps even a mirror reflecting what we, too, could become if pressed to the edge. Do not mistake my respect for weakness, or my caution for fear. But if we are to preserve the Empire, if we are to avoid an unthinkable war, then we must tread carefully, for in these humans, I see the spark of something even we, with all our strength and knowledge, may not be able to extinguish. When we first encountered a lone human scouting vessel near one of their outer colonies, I thought little of it. It was a small, unimpressive ship, likely built for reconnaissance, not combat. In the Empire, such a vessel would have been relegated to routine patrol duty, hardly worth a moment's consideration. So, I sent a modest contingent, a handful of our lighter attack ships, to intercept. It was, in my mind, no more than a formality, a trivial skirmish to remind this fledgling species of their place in the galaxy. We expected them to retreat, or at best, to put up a fleeting resistance. But the humans did not flee. They held their ground, radiating a quiet, steady resolve that was immediately unsettling. And then, rather than engage directly, they did something none of my officers had anticipated. They disappeared, vanishing into the dense asteroid belt nearby. Our ships, confident in superior technology and firepower, advanced, certain we could smoke them out, dismantling this so-called threat piece by piece. As we closed in, we realized how wrong we were. The humans moved with an instinctive understanding of the asteroid field, using the natural cover to evade detection. Our scanners, optimized for open space battles, were useless among the shifting rock and debris. They hid in plain sight, darting between the cover of asteroids, turning what we thought was a simple battleground into a labyrinth of unknowns. Soon, they began to strike, emerging from behind cover to launch short, concentrated attacks on isolated ships before disappearing again. One of our frigates, a sturdy vessel with enough firepower to devastate any of their ships, was the first to fall. A coordinated burst of missiles, fired in unison from different angles, overwhelmed its shields, reducing it to floating debris in moments. The precision of the attack was chilling. It was clear the humans were not blindly firing. They understood where to hit, targeting shield generators, weak points in the hull, areas where our armor was thin. Their attacks were focused, deliberate, and disturbingly effective. Before long, 2 more of our ships were rendered inoperable. I watched as these seemingly inferior vessels used the asteroid field itself as a weapon, forcing us into narrow passages, springing traps that seemed improvised but devastatingly effective. They even leveraged the gravitational pull of the larger asteroids, creating makeshift slingshots to boost their speed and launch surprise attacks from unpredictable vectors. The ingenuity was almost artistic, and all the while, our losses mounted. Each time we adjusted our tactics, they adapted as well, always staying one step ahead, exploiting any vulnerability we exposed. They had no formal training in space combat, no structured maneuvers that I could identify, yet they fought with a raw, instinctive grasp of warfare that left us scrambling. It was as though they had an intimate knowledge of chaos, using unpredictability as both weapon and shield. What struck me most was their coordination. Even when isolated, their pilots seemed to understand each other's intentions implicitly. They communicated, yes, but not in the way we did, rigid, methodical orders flowing down a chain of command. Their commands were fluid, responsive. I realized that they weren't just following orders. They were thinking, strategizing together as if driven by a shared, unspoken goal. When one pilot fell, another would take up their position, shifting seamlessly, adapting without hesitation or fear. The cost to us was staggering. What should have been a simple encounter became a drawn-out struggle, with each ship lost sending ripples of unease through my fleet. Our weapon systems, designed for precision and power, seemed slow and clumsy in comparison to their nimble, almost reckless maneuvers. I felt the respect growing with every calculated risk they took, every sacrifice they made, all of it building toward one undeniable conclusion. They were willing to do whatever it took to win. There was no fear in them, only purpose. Their resolve was something I had never encountered in a species of their level. These humans fought with a depth of commitment that was almost unnerving. It was not about pride or even survival. It was something beyond that, something I struggled to define. Their willingness to take risks was not the desperation of a species with nothing to lose. They were gambling with everything, fighting as if their very existence depended on every move, every breath. I watched as one of their vessels, heavily damaged, refused to retreat. Instead, it charged one of our destroyers head-on, dodging fire, weaving through the chaos, and launching a final, concentrated attack directly at its core. The destroyer's hull fractured, explosions ripping through its frame, and yet, the human ship continued, fighting until its own end was inevitable. And still, the pilot pushed forward, leaving only wreckage in his wake, a testament to the lengths they would go to. Even in their last moments, there was no surrender. It was as if they bore a responsibility, a need to push until every possible option was exhausted, until there was nothing left to give. Their actions spoke of a determination that was as alien to me as any technology. I found myself wondering, what could drive a species to such lengths? What belief, what sense of duty could ignite a spark that powerful? As the battle wore on, it became clear we could not break them, not through conventional means. Their losses did not weaken them. If anything, each fallen vessel seemed to strengthen their resolve. In our empire, we are trained to hold formation, to follow commands without question. But these humans, they moved like individuals, with a shared purpose, a unity that did not need rigid commands or hierarchy. They fought as though they had no concept of failure, only the unyielding drive to survive and to win. In the end, I ordered our forces to retreat. It was the first time I had ever commanded such a thing, the first time I had felt true humility on the battlefield. For every ship we destroyed, we lost 2 of our own. For every victory we claimed, they taught us another painful lesson in ingenuity, in resourcefulness, in the raw power of a species unwilling to be conquered. As we withdrew, I was left in awe of the humans, these so-called primitive beings who had turned a simple skirmish into a humbling lesson. They had reminded me of something I had long forgotten, that war is not merely a matter of power, of strength, or technology, but of spirit. And their spirit was unlike anything I had encountered. In those final moments, watching the humans regroup, battered but unbroken, I understood the gravity of what we had awakened. These humans were not merely an enemy. They were a force, a relentless, unpredictable tide, and I had no doubt that they would fight as fiercely, as brilliantly, as necessary to protect what was theirs. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep within my bones, that this was only the beginning. After that first skirmish, I began to notice a disturbing trend. The humans, once content with their humble, makeshift vessels, started changing. At first it was subtle. Their ships still looked crude by our standards, but their movements, their power signatures, there was something different. They weren't merely repairing their ships. They were reimagining them. Every encounter seemed to serve as a lesson, each skirmish a laboratory, as they took what we threw at them and found ways to improve. Within weeks, our scouts reported sightings of human ships using advanced shielding technology, shields suspiciously similar to our own. They were somehow able to reverse engineer captured or damaged Empire equipment and retrofit it onto their ships, integrating our tech with their own at an alarming rate. These changes didn't just mimic our capabilities, they seemed to push beyond them, adapting in ways that suited human tactics, nimble, reactive, constantly shifting. They took the most effective pieces of what we had, stripped away what they didn't need, and created hybrids that were lean, lethal, and unmistakably human. I remember the first time we engaged one of these modified ships. It looked familiar, but felt foreign. We expected them to rely on their usual hit-and-run tactics, but now they had defenses nearly matching our own, enhanced by their uncanny agility. Our crews reported strange modifications, things that went against conventional logic. One human cruiser had an energy pulse system we didn't even recognize, capable of disrupting our shields for a brief, deadly moment. They were innovating on the fly, integrating our technology in ways we hadn't anticipated, even improving it in certain areas. What was once a trivial opponent was evolving into something far more dangerous. It wasn't just their ships either. Human broadcasts began intercepting our communications. These weren't pleas for peace or cries for surrender. No, these were messages meant to unnerve us. They had tapped into our frequencies, broadcasting taunts, mockery. Some of it was dark humor, but some bordered on eerie. In one instance, a voice came through our comms, calmly discussing our ship's layout, pointing out weak spots with a casual precision that sent chills through the crew. It was a game to them, a psychological tactic that chipped away at our morale. These broadcasts became almost routine, and while they were never overtly hostile, the underlying tone was one of defiance and confidence that we had not expected. They used fear as a tool, understanding that while they might not have the overwhelming force to crush us outright, they could whittle away at our resolve, shake our soldiers' sense of superiority. Our forces, once unfazed, began to grow uneasy, questioning if these humans were even capable of feeling fear. The taunts felt calculated, strategic, the words echoing in our halls long after the battles ended. It was a form of psychological warfare that showed a deep understanding of their enemy and of themselves. And yet, their resilience under direct assault was perhaps the most troubling aspect of all. I recall a particular engagement over one of their outer colonies, a settlement we believed to be a weak link. We launched a full assault, expecting them to yield or scatter, but instead they fortified. It was as though they knew we were coming, readying defenses that far exceeded what we'd seen before. They stood their ground even as our bombardment rained down upon them, refusing to retreat or surrender, fighting tooth and nail for every inch. When we finally breached their lines, we saw devastation, yet the humans still moved with relentless efficiency, patching up damage, hauling equipment, scavenging parts. Their civilians worked alongside their soldiers, blurring the line between combatant and non-combatant, turning rubble into new defenses in record time. They rebuilt as quickly as we could destroy. Every time we thought we'd broken them, they would come back stronger, angrier, and more determined. What was once a battle of weapons and tactics became a test of wills. They would not break. Our usual strategy of prolonged assault, meant to demoralize, to grind an enemy down, only seemed to strengthen their resolve. Our losses mounted, while they absorbed each blow and returned it with an intensity that felt almost personal. For every strike we landed, they struck back harder, as if their very existence depended on it. I began to wonder if they had an endless supply of strength, a resilience that defied reason. I cannot fully convey the sheer unpredictability of these humans. We have fought empires, we have subdued civilizations, But there has always been a rhythm, a predictability to their resistance. But humans, they defied every pattern, every model we had constructed. There was no strategy they wouldn't try, no line they wouldn't cross if it meant survival. One moment, they would appear to be in disarray, but in the next, they would execute maneuvers that forced us into costly mistakes. In one instance, we encountered a squadron of human ships broadcasting what sounded like distress signals, drawing us into a trap. The squadron led us into a debris field where, without warning, dormant mines activated, ripping through our forces with calculated precision. It was a tactic they had invented on the spot, a move that no one had thought them capable of. And as the surviving ships pulled away, the humans followed, harrying our retreat with relentless attacks. They seemed to know that they didn't need to destroy us outright. They only needed to bleed us, to show us that we were vulnerable, that we had underestimated them. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps they were just lucky. Perhaps they were desperate. But no, this was not desperation. It was deliberate. They were watching us, learning, adapting with every encounter, turning our advantages into their own. Every time we developed a new strategy, they found a counter. Every weakness we identified, they found a way to patch. It was as if we were fighting not a single enemy, but an entire system of thought, an intelligence that was constantly evolving. I have come to understand that these humans do not merely fight to defend themselves. They fight to prove something more than the survival of their colonies or the safety of their kin. They fight to assert a defiance that is as much part of their nature as breathing. They adapt because they refuse to be outdone, to be less than those who would seek to dominate them. Every battle becomes a lesson, every setback a motivation to push harder, to rise again with an edge they did not have before. I have no illusions anymore. We cannot predict these humans. They have no single strategy we can unravel, no central weakness we can exploit. They are not bound by tradition or doctrine. They create, they improvise, they respond with an intensity that goes beyond mere survival. The more we push, the more they grow, the more dangerous they become. As I stand before you now, I say this. They are no longer the species we first encountered, those fledglings of a primitive world. They are evolving with a speed and resilience that I fear we cannot match. And they are watching us, every move, every tactic, learning from our strengths and preparing for our weaknesses. If we continue on this path, we are not simply engaging a minor species on the edge of our empire. We are unleashing something that we may never be able to contain. The decision was made. This human defiance had gone too far. The council decreed a final assault, an overwhelming offensive to wipe them out before they could pose a genuine threat. We amassed a fleet larger than anything they had seen, enough firepower to obliterate entire star systems, and set course for their homeworld, Earth. The plan was simple. Crush them utterly, leave nothing standing. They would understand the cost of challenging the Empire, and any remaining resistance would finally be silenced. We arrived at the edge of their solar system, a wall of ships stretching into the void, bristling with every weapon at our disposal. For a moment, there was a quiet unease in the air, a weight that settled over our forces. I dismissed it as pre-battle nerves. After all, no species had ever truly withstood the might of the Empire's full strength. It was an overwhelming show of force, one designed to bring fear and submission. This was to be the last chapter, the final warning to any who dared defy us. And then, as we prepared to move in, it happened. Before we could deploy, before we could even issue a single command, they struck. The first human ship dropped from subspace on our flank, then another, and another, squadrons of them, encircling us. They hadn't waited for our approach. They had decided to take the fight to us. This was no defensive retreat or desperation move. They were launching a full-scale counteroffensive. These were not the underpowered vessels we had encountered before. These were sleek, powerful ships reinforced with technology from every race they had encountered, including ours. They'd taken our own strengths, dissected them, and enhanced them to serve their unique strategies. What once was our edge had been sharpened and turned back upon us. Our initial response was to engage, confident we could withstand this audacious attempt to stand against us. But the humans had prepared well. Their formations were tighter, more disciplined, yet adaptive in ways we had never seen before. Their ships moved in a deadly dance, shifting in and out of firing positions, coordinating with precision that defied explanation. They seemed to operate almost as one mind, an interconnected force we couldn't isolate or dismantle. And unlike before, they did not strike and retreat. They were here to win. Then the onslaught began in earnest. Our screens lit up with cyber attacks, jamming signals that disrupted communication between our ships, glitches in our targeting systems that rendered even our most advanced weaponry useless. Their electronic warfare was beyond anything we had anticipated, and for the first time, our fleet was forced to fight blind. They had turned our own systems against us, exploiting weaknesses in our networks and algorithms we had never thought to shield. Panic began to ripple through our ranks as systems went offline, as our tactical advantage crumbled. Then came the second wave. Human ships equipped with weapons we'd never seen before, a hybrid of energy and kinetic force that tore through our shields with terrifying ease, cut through our formation. They had developed ways to bypass our defenses, firing concentrated energy pulses that overloaded our circuits, disabling ships in seconds. Each strike was calculated, targeting command ships, shield generators, any critical point that would leave us vulnerable. It was as if they had studied our fleet, dissecting its weak points and vulnerabilities, and now exploited them without hesitation. I watched, stunned, as our forces struggled to regroup, to regain control. But the humans pressed forward, their ships relentless, weaving through the chaos with a single-minded purpose that was unmistakable. They were fighting with an intensity one hadn't believed possible. For every ship they lost, two more appeared, and they did not hesitate, did not waver. Their movements were controlled, efficient, but underneath it all was a ferocity that shook even our most seasoned warriors. They had become something else, no longer the defenders but the aggressors, a force of sheer willpower driving us back. As our systems began to fail, they launched a new wave of tactics, deploying devices that attached themselves to our hulls, disabling shields, and rendering even our most advanced ships defenseless. They employed cyber warfare, direct assaults, and what could only be described as sheer cunning. I saw human ships attach themselves to our larger vessels, breaching them, overtaking them from the inside. They had learned not just to fight but to dominate, to control every aspect of warfare, turning our superiority into our downfall. And still, they kept advancing. The more we tried to regroup, the harder they pushed. It was not merely the technology they had acquired. It was the way they used it, the relentless drive behind every action. Their losses, which would have been crushing for any other species, only seemed to fuel their resolve. They fought with the knowledge that this was their last stand, that if they failed, they would lose everything. There was no holding back, no compromise. They were here to defend their home and to show us that they would not be conquered. I saw it in every maneuver, in the way their ships moved with an almost predatory efficiency. They would not yield, not until every last one of us had been forced to acknowledge their strength. And for the first time, as I watched our mighty fleet crumble under their relentless assault, I understood the extent of our miscalculation. We had not simply underestimated their technology or their tactics. We had underestimated their spirit, their capacity to turn the very essence of war into an unbreakable will to survive and win. One by one, our ships began to falter, crippled by damage, blinded by cyber attacks, immobilized by their ingenuity. The once mighty formation of the Empire's fleet was now a scattered, disorganized force, retreating from these humans who refused to be subdued. And still, they came, pressing forward with a purpose that no one could deny. They had forced us into retreat, into humiliation, and all the while, they never let up, never showed mercy. In those final moments, as our remaining ships limped away, I knew that humanity had won. Not just this battle, but a place in the galaxy that none would dare challenge again. They had achieved what we believed impossible. They had turned the might of the Empire, our confidence, and our superiority, into ruins. We had underestimated their potential, their resilience, and most of all, their resolve. They had risen from the ashes of every blow we dealt, and in their victory, they had proven that they were not just another species to conquer. Humanity was a force all its own. They had shown us that there were things that strength and technology alone could not overcome, a will that refused to break, a spirit that refused to yield. They had taught the Empire a lesson we would never forget. And as we retreated, the words of their final broadcast echoed in my mind. This is our home. Come again if you dare. As I stand here before the Council, I know that my words may sound exaggerated, perhaps even desperate to those who haven't seen what I have. But let me be clear. These humans are not like any other species we have encountered. They're more than just resilient or adaptable. They possess a drive and determination that transcends anything we anticipated. I have seen them face certain death and fight as if victory was their birthright, refusing to yield no matter the odds. To provoke them further, to underestimate them once again, would be to invite a calamity beyond anything our empire has faced. They began as an underdeveloped, unremarkable species in a remote corner of the galaxy, and yet, in a handful of encounters, they turned our greatest strengths against us, exploiting every flaw in our tactics, every weakness in our technology. While we believed their tech to be primitive, they looked at our systems and saw opportunities for improvement, for evolution. In a matter of weeks, they closed gaps that should have taken generations to bridge. Their ingenuity and resourcefulness are not just survival mechanisms. They are intrinsic to who they are, woven into the very fabric of their nature. When I speak of humanity's potential, I do not merely mean their capacity for war. No, it's their capacity for growth, their tenacity, and their relentless curiosity that make them so dangerous. Every skirmish we fought, every trap we set, every tactic we tried, they adapted, evolved, and turned our own methods against us. They are not held back by tradition or rigid doctrines. They think freely, creatively, challenging conventions that we have relied on for centuries. Their rapid advancement is not just a response to our attacks, but a revelation of their boundless potential. But perhaps even more important than their technological progress is the sheer depth of their resolve. I have seen them withstand bombardments that would bring any other race to its knees. They do not see themselves as conquerors, but they fight as if their entire world, their identity, hinges on every battle. It's this spirit, this refusal to surrender, that makes them unlike any other. They fight not just to win, but to assert their right to exist on their terms. There is a power in that, one that can't be measured by the size of their fleet or the firepower of their weapons. You must understand, humanity's strength lies in their unity of purpose and their unbreakable will. When their home was threatened, they did not scatter, did not fracture as so many other civilizations have done under our might. Instead, they grew stronger, more resolute. It is their unyielding spirit that binds them, that drives them to continue where others would fall. And as they continue to explore and expand into the galaxy, that spirit will only grow. With every encounter, they will learn, they will adapt, and they will become even more formidable. I warn you now, do not mistake their current limitations as permanent weaknesses. They are not bound by the natural order we are accustomed to. They push beyond what we assume are the limits of strength and resilience, and they do so with an intensity that we, in all our glory, have never needed. They are a young species, yes, but they are also a species unrestrained, one that does not accept barriers or boundaries. They have the potential to redefine the balance of power in the galaxy, and if provoked, they will not hesitate to do so. As members of the Empire's highest council, you may think that we have nothing to fear, that our superiority remains unchallenged. But I tell you now, humanity is a storm waiting to be unleashed. They do not know how to back down, how to accept defeat. They fight not for dominance, not for territory, but for survival and the preservation of their way of life. That is what makes them the most dangerous enemy we have ever faced. Their unity is forged not by conquest, but by their fierce independence, a spirit that no empire, no matter how powerful, can easily subdue. We must abandon this belief that they can be controlled, that we can break them by sheer force. I have seen their faces in battle, their determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Every time we think we have bested them, they come back stronger, more prepared, more willing to defy us. They learn, they grow, and they rise again and again. To challenge them further would not only be reckless, it would be suicidal for our empire. They will not falter, and they will not forgive if we continue to threaten their existence. We stand at a crossroads. We can choose to heed this warning, to respect their strength and their autonomy, or we can continue down this path and risk awakening a force that will not stop until it has dismantled everything we hold dear. I urge you all to consider what you have heard, to recognize that humanity's potential is not something we can afford to ignore or dismiss. They may be small in number, but their spirit fills 1,000 worlds. The choice is ours, but the consequences will be dire if we disregard the truth of what we are dealing with. I know the pride of our empire, the power we wield, but I also know the price of hubris. Do not let us make the mistake of assuming that we are untouchable. Humanity is not a passing threat. They are a storm on the horizon, a force of nature that will reshape the galaxy if pushed too far. I leave you with this. Consider carefully what you wish for if we continue to provoke them, they will not hesitate to show us the true extent of their power. Let us not invite a future in which humanity rises to become not just our enemy, but our undoing. We must step back and recognize that some forces, some spirits, are better left unchallenged. With this warning, I take my leave, trusting that wisdom will prevail over arrogance.